Hello everybody, Raven Knight here. Today I want to do something kind of interesting and talk about Warden and my stance on Warden. Warden is one of those characters that at first I really loved, but mostly for their aesthetic. But then my position changed so much and altered constantly that I feel like this is kind of a journey for me with Warden. So let me start at the very beginning. When I first started playing For Honor, I actually was on the Samurai faction side because I was in the middle of my Asian Studies minor. I was in love with all things Asian because that was where my studies were going on. Like, it was where I focused my time and energy, so I felt like the Samurai faction was very much what I enjoyed. But if there was a character outside of the Samurai that I really liked, it had to be Warden. The appeal of them, the aesthetic, the design, the longsword, all of it just felt great. I loved the Warden. Warden was cool. But you gotta realize that at this point in time in my history with For Honor, I wasn't playing against people all that much. I was mostly just playing against bots and in the campaign. I wasn't really touching the PvP modes all that much. And you might think, well, that's kind of weak, Raven. Keep in mind, I'm not a huge multiplayer guy. I don't do that a whole lot in most games. Mostly, I just like narrative-driven games where you play as a character and go on a journey. That's kind of my direction. But eventually, I did have to try going into PvP. And when I did, keep in mind, this was before Warden's big update where his second heavies were unblockable, okay? Warden had very little to his kit. He had his shoulder bash mix-up, but that was about it. Other than that, Warden was kind of weak, and I was so upset about it. I felt like it was one of those things where I really want Warden to get fixed. But here's the thing, here's the rub, here was the difference. I feel the same way about Highlander, but there was a difference. With Highlander, I looked at him and I said, you know what, I just don't want to play this guy. I'm not a big fan of him. But with Warden, I said, I want to play him, please fix him. Because I can't play him right now as he is. And thank goodness that Ubisoft came along and fixed him, because damn, he was hard to play at first. But now, he's actually okay. Now, at the time, once they fixed him, I still thought he was too weak because I was still getting my butt whooped constantly in matches. And I felt like, is it a me problem? Or is it a Warden problem? What's the deal here? So my stance on Warden had reached an odd point. I loved him aesthetically. I loved them design-wise. I loved their weapon. Their fighting style was weird to me because I thought it should look different for, a sword master. But even so, in just a competitive nature, I still was having a lot of trouble. So I wasn't sure how to stand on Warden. I felt like they were probably the weakest of all the vanguards out there, probably one of the weakest of the knights in general. I just didn't know what to make of this character. And then I stumbled across Havoc's channel. And after watching Havoc, who I would argue is one of the best Warden players in the game, if not the best, I was floored by how effective he was with a Warden. I learned from watching his videos all kinds of different tricks and tips about playing Warden that I'd never thought of before. True story, this is going to make me sound stupid, but I had no idea that you could feint, that you could cancel out a shoulder bash and catch him with a guard break. I didn't know you could do that. I did not know this. I also did not know that the max punish for a Warden, if you throw someone down while you have revenge, is do a zone into a top heavy. I didn't know that either. Like, there were things about Warden that I did not know. Now, you can chalk that up to me not being as familiar with the game as I needed to be. Because, as I've said before, I am not as familiar with the mechanical nature of the game as I am the culture, history, and narrative of the game. Those are my areas of expertise. But I quickly learned that if I want to really appreciate Warden, I need to understand them more. And over time, and especially through my friendship with Havoc, I began to learn so much more about Warden to the point that even though I'd already created Ruth, she rapidly became my most used character because I just loved getting better with her, training with her, and enjoying her. But of course, the question has to be asked, why did Warden appeal so much to you? Was it really just the aesthetic, or was there something more to it? And I think, yes, the aesthetic, but there is a slight add-on to that. There is a slight change, and I'll tell you what it is. I have always, even back when I was doing my Asian Studies minor, loved knights. The whole idea of the knightly era, the knights of ancient Europe, the crusades, all of these things fascinated me. It's part of the reason why I studied them so much growing up, because I wanted to know more about them, especially knowing that I'm related to knights, that if you go back in my father's family tree far enough, you will connect us to knights. So there was a lot about knights that I really liked and wanted to know more about. I was very much into the knight aesthetic and the knight history. The problem was when I looked at the other characters of For Honor, and this isn't to sound mean, but I didn't feel that same knightly vibe. I mean, when I look at Conqueror, he is a knight, but he strikes me as more of a brute or a savage. When I look at Lawbringer, he's obviously a knight, but again, he connects very much more to the Papal Guard. When I look at Peacekeeper, I see a hooded assassin that they got the identity from Assassin's Creed, which is fine, it's not a bad thing, but that's just what I got from it. With Gladiator and Centurion, they're both Roman. With Griffin, he can be a knight, but he doesn't stick out as one to me. And with Warmonger, probably the only other one that looks like a knight, she's just evil. You know, she is black cat petting, twirling on a swivel chair and laughing maniacally with a monocle on, evil. Okay, that's just what she is. And I know you can make your character whatever you want them to be, but that was what Warmonger was for me at the time. Just the dark knight, the black knight, the one you're afraid of. Warden, meanwhile, held up this kind of identity that, again, you can make your character whatever you want, but there was a nobility to Warden. There was a thing about Warden that really stuck out to me as not just a proud warrior, but chivalrous. You know, they hold a sense of nobility and honor to themselves that it makes them stand out. There's a reason that they are the face of For Honor most of the time, because when you think knight, let's face it, Warden is probably the first stereotypical thing you see, and I think that is what drew me to them so quickly. Not just the aesthetic or design, but also what they kind of stood for, what they represented, what they were all about. This sense of nobility and honor that really goes beyond. And don't get me wrong, you can make a Warden an evil son of a bitch if you want. That's not in doubt. You totally can, and I have seen people do that. I've seen some dark-looking Wardens with executions and emotes to basically make them come off as this demonic hellspawn, you know, all that. I get it. And yet, even in those moments, Warden comes across as just this real badass, but also a real noble. Someone who carries themselves in a unique way, and it goes back to the campaign. You know, you have the Lord Warden, the Warden that you follow, who talks about his stance as a Warden in a unique way. Like, I remember in the first campaign mission where you're fighting the second of Holden Cross, and he says he was a Warden or used to be. As if to say, because I looked at him, I was like, well, he's definitely a Warden, that's his class. But then I realized he wasn't talking about his class, he was talking about his code. The way he carried himself. Being a Warden isn't just about being your class, it goes beyond that. And that's one of the things I love about Warden. Any idiot can pick up a longsword and put on a helmet and say, hey, Warden now, but that's not what a Warden is. And that's why when I was writing Stephen the Righteous and Ruth in their story, especially when I was doing the Ulter and Ruth story, I wanted to explain that more clearly. If you haven't heard my Ulter and Ruth story, it's basically a 3-part story where I write about Havoc's Warden character, Ultor, meeting my Warden character, Ruth, and they have a little adventure that takes up 3 parts. And in the 3rd part, I have a flashback where Ruth is being trained by her adopted father figure, Stephen, and he explains to her what a Warden is and what they're meant to do. And I really, really did want to dive into that, because to me, what a Warden is goes beyond just putting on armor, carrying a longsword, and knowing how to throw a shoulder bash. A Warden, to me, embodies something more, like I've said before, noble. Which is part of the reason why in my For Honor and Glory story, I named my Knight Legion the Noble Legion. Because I think there's nobility, there's honor, there's respect, there's decorum, there's chivalry involved in being a Warden. Now, of course, not all Wardens who play Warden, not all players who play Wardens will want to embody that. Some just want to be toxic tryhards, and you know what? That's fair. I mean, even when I watched Havoc play, there were times that he dipped into that kind of dark Warden aesthetic, and yet at the same time, even when I saw that, I couldn't shake the reality that the Warden carries themselves in a way that I've always seen as your quintessential honorable knight, even if they don't want to behave honorably. And I really, really like that. That's one of the reasons why I think Warden sticks out to me. It's why I went from being a hard Orochi main to being a hard Warden main, because Orochi very much became the thing that I didn't want to see in a samurai. Just, like, Orochi annoys me now. He really does. But that's why I like Warden so much. I think that, at least that's the primary reason. There are other reasons too. I think that the different types of outfits he wears are really cool. I think his executions are really awesome. I do love long swords overall, so I admit that's a large part of it. I think the only thing I don't like about Warden is in the female Warden variant, you have this little braid coming out of the back of the helmet, and as Lark and I have both agreed many times, that's not how that works. You would not be able to see a braid. You could have just changed her model to look feminine and it would have been fine. It would have been okay, but they didn't do that, so that does annoy us a little bit. That does annoy us, but that's beside the point. So overall, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to talk about why I love Warden. I know this was a short video, probably one that y'all probably won't care too much about, but I just wanted to give my 2 cents on why I like Warden so much and what I see in them. Maybe I'll do this kind of thing for other characters and other classes within the game. I think that'd be fun. And I also want to give a shout out to Havoc. I'll be real, guys. If it hadn't been for Havoc's videos, I probably would have kept Warden in this little bin where it's like, I want to love you, but you're too weak. I can't play you. Ubisoft needs to fix you. Now, I still stand that he could probably use something else. Like, I think he needs a little something. I don't know what it is. I don't know what they need to do really to fix Warden so much. And Havoc, if you're watching this, I'd love for you to hit me up in the comments and say what you think Warden needs, because I'd love your input, because you are the Warden master. But it was Havoc who really introduced me to the idea that Warden is not nearly as bad as I thought he was, and he does have some ability. I mean, after all, like, I've played Ruth so much now, I'm not gonna say I'm a Warden master like Havoc is, but I definitely know that I've improved as a Warden. So really love Warden. Wanted to share my thoughts on them. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, I will see you in my next video. Take care.